listening to the DVM Podcast Empire. Now with over 1 million downloads.
1 million downloads.
Find us online at DVMPE.com.
100% free.
1,000,000% fan.
And now,
Push the button.
Is it possible that we have permitted ideology, political and economic philosophies, and governmental policies to keep us from considering the very real, everyday problems of our people?
So what if my feelings are hurt? Does that give me the right to prevent others from expressing their opinions?
Wait a second, Doc. Are you telling me this sucker is nuclear?
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Mr. Anderson.
Don't push it.
Hey everybody, welcome back once again to Push the Button. We're the show that likes to get you hot and then make fun of you for getting upset. Hey, I'm your host, David Vox Mullen, the man of many talents.
And I'm a man of few talents. I'm talking about the biblical talents, like the money. Mr. Anderson.
And in this episode, we wanted to touch on something that we had talked about a while ago. And this was one of the biggest things that I think a lot of atheists and Christians get into. The biggest debate is even the existence of Jesus, or at least the man, Jesus, or Jesus of Nazareth, or Jesus the Christ, or the Messiah, or whatever you want to call him. But there are some people out there who don't believe that he was even a born human being who even walked the earth, that he was nothing more than a myth, much like many myths of that era. And we actually have brought on a friend of mine, a special guest, a good friend of mine by the name of Brian Bauer, who is a pastor who has been he's been through Bible school. He's been a pastor for many years, and an old friend of mine, and he's got a sick sense of humor like I do. So I thought, why not have him join the discussion?
I like that introduction, Dave. He's a pastor. He has a sick sense of humor.
That's what gives you credibility in my book, you know?
Well, yeah, here's what I get all the time. I'm not Christian enough for the church, and I'm not worldly enough for the world. I'm in a constant sense of being alone. It's wonderful.
That's kind of how I roll. So that's
yeah.
But
I'm not depressed or anything.
No, right. Real funny. So I know, Ken, you and I have talked in the past about wanting to talk about this specific subject because if I remember correctly, you were on the side of you haven't been given evidence that he existed, right?
Well, I don't know where I stand on it actually, because I've read numerous accounts, both pro and against.
Sure.
From the theologian point of view, from the non-theist who believes that Jesus existed as a historical figure, and from the perspective of historians who believe that he was just another mythology.
Sure.
An invented figure. And for me, I don't want to get into it right now, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
If he existed or not, it doesn't matter to me.
Okay. And that makes sense, and that helps me gauge kind of where you're at. So let's talk about the mythical Jesus first. Like, where do we get the concept that, like, what are the arguments for no such person?
Well, I mean, people will say that there are dozens, at least, of parallels with other mythological heroes, figures, gods, demigods that existed before Christ. And I've heard, watch the documentary Zeitgeist. I assume you've seen this?
We all have Netflix. It's on Netflix if you haven't seen it.
Yeah. And so they go through and they basically draw parallels between all these different gods. Horus, Dionysus, and yada yada yada, on down the list. And then I've heard it refuted. I've actually watched a documentary where they go through and they say, like, well, these similarities are sort of manufactured by this person who has this non-theistic point of view, this anti-Christian, basically.
I want to stop you right there. Just to kind of offshoot to the right for a minute here. I'm always blown away with the amount of sway that a documentarian can hold. I'm serious, and that goes on both ways.
That's true.
I growing up, I'd watch stuff from Michael Moore, who would.
He was so right about everything, wasn't he?
but you see what I mean?
Super guy.
But like the whole world kind of jumps on to one point of view or the other based on one personal.
Yeah, have you seen the documentary Jesus Camp?
No, I haven't.
Oh man, I have not laughed that much in a long time.
Yep.
But that's what I mean. Like, okay, what was the big one he had?
That's what we're all doing, by the way. We're all doing that.
Right. So, but like he did the Fahrenheit 9/11, which was a big deal about September 11th, conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
And then there was an additional documentary that came out to completely refute what that one did. And when I first watched his documentary, I was like, wow, maybe that's what really happened. And then I watched the other documentary that was completely the other way, and I was like, wow, maybe that's what really happened. And then I stopped and went, that can't be right.
Right.
So,
they can't both be right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things where it's like, wow, documentaries, they're fun to watch, but
can they?
Scary.
Because, you look at the People's History of the United States, written by, I believe his name is Zimmerman. It's actually, I think, required reading in certain colleges, like most colleges, about American history. And then you read the Patriots' history of the United States, and like they're two completely conflicting,
right,
accounts of what actually happened. And you look back through history and look at American history. How many times have you heard a story and then years later you heard that's completely inaccurate?
Sure.
A case in point, George Washington and the cherry tree. We were taught as little kids. And then come to find out that actually never happened, or according to...
Well, everybody knew he was a Freemason, Ken.
And the Freemasons control the world along with the...
Germs. Yeah. And germs. And Walt Disney.
We'll do the Illuminati Freemason conspiracy theory episode some other time. All right. So back, right, in his frozen head. Back to Jesus, really. Okay, yeah, I've heard that same philosophy, Ken, about how he was kind of paralleled by of like Horus and Dionysus and all that. The thing that's interesting to me is where, and maybe this is a question for Brian. Obviously we have the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I know that we're going to get into whether or not those were even written by those gentlemen. But as far as I know, and I'm an idiot, and I want to get that out there right in front.
Bad credibility.
Aside from that depiction of this man, what other information do we have historically, not biblically, but factual or historically, that this person existed? Do we have anything, Brian? Did you study anything?
Oh, yeah. So, okay. I'll somewhat answer that question, but I gotta add a footnote before I jump on.
Please do.
That's like, we just talked about George Washington. Let's talk about American history without American history documents. That's a bit of a false, broken premise.
Sure.
So I have to say that up front. I think, okay, that's not, you might need to more look at, okay, what is the documentation and what does it say and what's the validity of that documentation, instead of saying, no, that documentation's only valid if outside sources from that validate it. We can't study Caesar without studying Roman documentation. It's going to be difficult, very, very difficult to find, darn near impossible.
Right.
So, but that doesn't remove the validity of Roman antiquity. So same thing over here. Now I've got to say I'm not an apologist and I'm not a theologian either. I'm a pastor.
Right.
And you know what? This conversation, most people actually don't show up saying, "Hey, I'm an atheist and I showed up today."
Right.
That being said, I am classically evangelical, so I believe in sharing my faith and things like that. But as a pastor, a lot of times what I end up doing is more what we would term equipping the saints, saying somebody's, "Hey, I'm at work and this guy doesn't believe and here's his reasons why." And I answer the conversation as kind of the guy who says, "Well, these are some of the sources to look at. Let's talk through this. I'd love to meet your friend," type of a thing. But a lot of times, for better or for worse, I end up inside the four walls. But that being said, manuscript-wise alone, what we have for the validity of the New Testament and the Gospels makes everything else in that period of history pale in comparison. If you don't believe in and look, I'm not going to get into the validity right now of the supernatural and was Jesus raised from the dead, et cetera.
No, we're just talking about the man.
Yeah, I mean, do I believe it? Of course I do. But that being said, as far as did Jesus exist, well, do you believe Alexander the Great existed? Do you believe Caesar existed? Because there's more documentation for the life of Christ than there is for either one of those guys by about times 3.
I've heard, and forgive me because I don't have this information at the tip of my fingertips.
Hey man, I don't have it all either, so let's just put that out there right now.
Yeah, if we don't specifically reference something, it's because we don't have it at the tip of our fingertips. But if you require this information, we'll do our best to make sure that you get it.
Sure,
absolutely.
With that being said, I've heard, and I just listened to a podcast last night with Dr. Richard Carrier, who wrote a book. He wrote several books, one of them called Proving History, Bayes' Theorem and the Quest for the Historical Jesus. He's one of the guys that says that Jesus didn't exist as a historical figure.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and I think I shared that with David last night.
I listened to the same episode because he forwarded that to me because he wanted me to be able to.
I was really
because he's playing under the table is what he's doing.
Gotcha. Oh, that's good.
I wanted everyone to know where everyone was coming from, and I liked the episode.
And he forwarded you the book of Genesis for my side. So.
I didn't.
I love it.
All right, keep going.
Terrible.
So, in that podcast that I'm referring to,
and a Kirk Cameron documentary. Okay,
that's enough.
All right.
Oh my God! And what's Kirk Cameron's buddy there?
Yeah, I saw him years ago. What is his name?
Yeah, look, the banana.
Yeah. He's a little fella. I've met him before. Ray Comfort.
I like to give Ray Comfort a short clothesline. That's what.
You'd have to bend down.
That's why I said a short clothesline.
Yeah. I think I met him once. The Bible college I went to actually brought him in to speak, like once a year. Now, to be fair, before you judge my Bible college, we had constant new speakers every week from all over the globe, and it was, take what you can, leave what you can. But that being said, yeah, I spent a little bit of time just meeting him, and I think, man, there's no way he's past 5'2". Anyway, go ahead.
Wow. Okay.
So this podcast that we're referring to is it's an episode of The Thinking Atheists, and it was the one entitled "Did Jesus Exist?" with Dr. Richard Carrier.
Yeah, and he had a guest on too who was what was he again? He was an author.
Baptist minister.
No, that was the host.
The host, yeah.
Right? Yeah, he was
Richard Carrier's he's the one promoting his book though.
Right, he was the one that wrote the book that I'm referring to.
I got you.
And basically he said in there that in fact if you look at it, it's the exact opposite. That there are people say that all the time, that we have more evidence to support Jesus than we do to support these other historical figures. And he claims that it's exactly opposite. Now, with that being said, and I know that you said that you didn't want to talk about the supernatural aspect.
No, I will talk about it. I was just saying
that
not in the context of that.
But I don't think that you can talk about the validity of a document without referring to the fact that, Socrates may not have existed as we know it. Maybe he didn't write that book. Maybe he was made up and somebody else used a pseudonym. But Socrates doesn't make extraordinary claims. And as Carl Sagan said so eloquently, extraordinary evidence or extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
I would agree with that statement. Go ahead, finish.
Do we have evidence of, this man who was born of a virgin without the use of modern technology? He was crucified. He died for a period of 72 hours. His heart ceased to beat for 72 hours and then was rejuvenated, and then it was reversed without the use of future technology. He walked on water. He turned water into wine, yada, 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 and he ascended to heaven without the use of technology.
Yeah.
So do
Ken,
we have
I would
evidence
agree with
of
you.
this?
Well, finish. Yeah, sorry.
That's what my point is.
So, Ken, I would agree with you that if that's not true, that's messed up. Okay?
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
How do we know that it's true?
How do we know that it's true? Okay, so the one thing I would say, like, I've listened to the show, and you're a really intelligent guy, Ken. You're well read, which is, I've met numerous wrestlers in my day. A lot of those guys are a little more blue collar, mentality-wise. And they're the best people in the world. Seriously, some of them are the most integrity, the kindest-hearted guys. Honestly, they're the athletes you'd want to hang out with.
Yeah.
And I would say, but there's not too many. Ken, you're a guy who's extremely well read and spends his time on the facts and wants to know of it. I imagine a lot of the guys in your industry are am I wrong in saying they're a little more blue collar, a little more salt of the earth? Is that wrong to say?
Well, I mean, and as I sort of discussed in our first episode,
hello?
And my connection with David was born out of a frustration that, for years and years and years, I've been told, like, you need this in your life. This is important. This is the most important thing in your life. And the people around me couldn't understand why I didn't have this in my life. And, but yeah, I can't really talk about this stuff on the road with my travel compatriots, and it's not necessarily that they're not read. It's just that they're read up in different areas. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I'm interested in politics. I'm interested in religion. Like when
Sure.
my wife and my in-laws and my relatives, my grandma, my grandpa, my aunts, uncles, friends all say, you need this? I say, okay. I've never really been a believer. I've always I was forced to go to Sunday school when I was a kid. And
Okay.
I remember at a very early age, sorry to get off on a tangent here, but
No, that's fine.
No.
to give you some background, like when I
That's
was,
half what the show is, right? Tangents?
Yeah. Totally. And I remember being on the age of 12 and thinking, this stuff just doesn't, I don't get it. I don't get how one guy being tortured and murdered makes up for everybody in human history. I don't understand that. That doesn't make sense to me. That God basically required a sacrifice of himself to save us from himself. I couldn't square that in my mind. So basically, when I run into people, they tell me, you need this, you need this, you need this. Okay, I'm going to do the research. I'm going to read the Bible from front to back to front, and then I'm going to read. I just recently sent out an email to somebody I'm in dialogue with, one of my fans who, incidentally is telling me, you need this, you need this, you need this. And so I've been having an open dialogue with him back and forth. And he asked me point blank, he's like, what is your background? And I said, look, I have 75 to 80 books, Christian books, apologist books in my house. I have 10 to 20 atheists or books that come from an atheist perspective.
Sure.
So, yeah, basically what I'm trying to say is that, I don't get to talk about this stuff with my friends. And so it's nice to be able to talk with you guys about it.
And the point I was making was, I think a good chunk of the wrestling community, a lot of them are believers.
Yes.
And they are much so what I was saying is, because it sounded like I was maybe picking on, and I wasn't. I have mad respect for the wrestling community. I'm 34 and I blew a disc in my back from just living life. So, I look at it, and if it's the average churchgoer, much like maybe somebody you work with, the average person in the church, unlike the scientific community, or maybe I should say the secular humanist community, the people who end up on television to write books are the best of that community, the ones with the sharpest minds and the best arguments. The one in our camps are the ones who raise the most money.
And I was just going to say, arguably, in our case, it's the opposite. It's the worst of us.
Right. Yeah. Often I love Pat Robertson as a brother, but I wish he was mute. I wish he couldn't speak. Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron, as far as their defenses of the faith, man, if you want a low-level layman's debate on apologetics, I get it. If you're talking to the guy in the street who's like, I don't believe in God because science, and that's the end of his argument, then the Coke can argument of where did that come from might make a little bit of sense on that. But those of us who are like, yeah, I want to dig a little bit deeper than that. Let's see how far this rabbit hole goes.
Yeah.
Those of us who believe that way often don't get a voice, and some people just feel like, I don't want to have that debate. Let's move forward. But there are guys, the best of our voices are guys like Ravi Zacharias. That guy's unreal in my view. A guy who's done a lot of his homework. He's not maybe as well-read of a speaker, but a man who's done his homework, Josh McDowell. And on this particular topic, his book, More Than a Carpenter, to me is spectacular in this apologetics realm. And then Josh McDowell went on further. Josh McDowell and Ravi were guys from very different backgrounds. Josh McDowell was a guy who was an atheist as a college student, who then went on a crusade to disprove God, and in the process, similar to like Lee Strobel.
I was just going to say that sounds like Strobel's story.
Yes, but McDowell was around long before Strobel. But McDowell ended up putting up a couple volumes of books that read more like encyclopedias than they are anything else, called Evidence That Demands a Verdict.
Yep, I have that.
And they're great reads. They're really spectacular arguments. But one of the things he poses in those books, in that and More Than a Carpenter, he brings up you guys have mentioned in the other episodes, the C.S. Lewis as liar, lunatic, Lord, which is a very valid argument. But another one is, when it comes to history, you can't entirely view it through a specifically scientific lens. And part of the reason is, if you view it entirely through science, then you can measure nothing that you see in antiquity, because everything breaks down to observation and what you can measure based off entirely what's in front of you. So there's got to be other ways of measurement. So one of the arguments he brings up is historical legal proof. And historical legal proof is the evidence of documentation and witnesses, and then tests against those things like biographical tests, internal evidence tests, tests against the variance in the text, and what happens there. So he weighs a lot of that, and we don't have time, and nobody wants to listen to us go through all of that. I don't want to listen to me go through all that, but
we can do that off the air. That's fine.
Right. One of the things, he mentions a biographical text. To quote from him, he's quoting F.F. Bruce, who was a Rylands professor of biblical criticism and exegesis at the University of Manchester. No classical scholar would listen to an argument or that the authenticity of Herodotus or Thucydides is in doubt, because the earliest manuscripts of their works, which are of use to us, are over 1,300 years later than the original. Nobody, in other words, what he's saying is we don't doubt the validity of this piece of antiquity, but we're doubting the person of Jesus. And I would affirm what you're saying, Ken, and saying, because the problem with Jesus is either it's real or it isn't. And if it's real, it's a game changer. Everything changes. And to me, one of the points that argues its reality is the fact that of 2,000 plus years later, we're looking at this man in history who pretty much came from, according to the text, came from nothing, did miraculous things in a period of only 3 years. We see when he's born, we see him at about 12, and then we don't see him again until about 30 to 33, and then, death, resurrection, and then he's gone, and then the church. Right. Yet there are other people in that point in history who are claiming, messiahship. Right. But name one. I mean, we don't. You can't. Why did this guy change the earth? Why did a carpenter born to nobody under Roman occupation change the face of the earth? Why did a guy who was trying to kill these people dramatically turn and become now the author of a third of that New Testament? What happened? Why is this so significant? So that's the question that needs to be answered. And truthfully, that is how the first church began. It didn't begin at, do you believe the Bible? I think that's a poor starting point for anybody to the point of belief. I think the starting point is, who is Jesus?
Well, where do we get the story of Jesus from, though?
Yeah, you'd have to get it from the Gospels.
Right. So
at this point in time, back then you didn't. When they started, you didn't. You got it from word of mouth. Go ahead.
And that is, in my opinion, an extremely unreliable method of passing information.
Well, here, let me jump in here, guys. There's it's famously been told to us. I mean, like you said, the story of George Washington, Paul Revere, the story of how Paul Revere rode all the way down the eastern seaboard to warn that the British were coming. We've learned. Yeah, he was in a band or in a van. But we've learned that that's not necessarily the case. In fact, he wasn't the one who rode the entire seaboard. Yet he's the one that we give all the credit to.
Yeah.
And that was only, a couple hundred years ago.
And what's your argument there?
That word of mouth isn't always as powerful as word of mouth, and actual documentation, because we have documents that say he did it, aren't as powerful as, or not as powerful, but they don't change the validity of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, okay, Paul Revere did all this stuff. Well, we say that because word of mouth, allegedly, and we say that because of what was taught to people. But beyond that, if he didn't do it, and we now have evidence that that was not the case, anything that was written or said prior to that didn't make it so. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let me read this quote. Sir William Ramsay, one of the greatest archaeologists ever to have lived, was a student of the German Historical School, taught the book of Acts was a product of the mid-2nd century AD and not the 1st century as it purports to be. After reading modern criticism about the book of Acts, Ramsay became convinced that it was not a trustworthy account of the facts of its time, AD 50, and therefore was unworthy of consideration by a historian. So in his research on the history of Asia Minor, Ramsay paid little attention to the New Testament. His investigation, however, eventually compelled him to consider the writings of Luke, the author of Book of Acts, the archaeologist, and also the Book of Luke. Ultimately, there was no Book of Acts. It was Luke Part 1 and 2, or Acts Part 1 and 2. The archaeologist observed the very meticulous accuracy of the historical details, and gradually his attitude toward the book of Acts began to change. He was forced to conclude, quote, Luke is a historian of the first rank. This author should be placed along with the very greatest of historians. And this is Sir William Ramsay, a man who didn't believe in the account. So what happened? And that doesn't mean William Ramsay became a believer in the process. And that's I think eventually what happens. We're arguing here, word of mouth is it's like telephone.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. amongst us.
Which I have to say, David, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just have to insert this. The last episode that we did, or maybe the second to last episode that we did, David brought up this idea, this telephone, and then it was as if I wasn't even listening to you, and
I wasn't going to say anything. So we literally played telephone with each other.
We did. So, sorry about that, David.
No, not at all.
I heard it back, and I was like, yeah, that's what I said.
Okay. Got to be careful playing that with little kids, though.
Yeah. Oh.
Things can turn. Anyway.
Ken's going to find out. He's going to find out. He's going to say the wrong thing in front of his kids when they're a little older, and then they're going to repeat it.
How old are your kids, Ken?
7 months. Almost 8 months.
Nice. I have 4.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah.
What are they?
Colin's 11. Nathan is 9. Andrew is 6. And Shine, my daughter, is a year and a half. And we had a 4th son there that we lost. But yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry about your dad too. But the game of telephone, absolutely true. But we have to understand something. Culturally back then, it isn't the same as it was today. Back then, oral tradition was sacred and was actually mentored until they got the story right for years upon years upon years till it was recorded down.
That's an interesting point, because that is still withheld in Jewish tradition.
Very much so.
It's also only a hypothesis.
Sure, but the concept of holding oral speech to high regard is something that is still presently practiced in the Jewish faith.
So you're telling me that you could sit down with a cultural Jew, with an Orthodox Jew, and they could recite word for word out of this text?
Well, again, I'm not Jewish, but from what I know of, my friends who were Jewish who went through their bar mitzvahs and all that stuff, they had to go through training to recite, the spoken word, so to speak.
Which usually involves reading and then reciting, memorizing, reading, memorizing, speaking it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
To just listen to somebody talk the whole Old Testament, all the books of the Old Testament.
Right.
And then
which at Jesus' day, according to the time and the study, that is what it took to be a Pharisee or a Sadducee. You had the Old Testament basically memorized rote. You definitely had the Pentateuch memorized, if not further on. Which again, another variant in the story that to me brings validity and uniqueness is Jesus is not the Messiah you would shape if you were shaping a Messiah. It doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't you pick a leader? Why wouldn't you pick somebody that the people got behind? You definitely wouldn't pick somebody who was murdered very badly.
Actually, there are multiple sources of, like I said, these gods that existed long before Jesus. These gods that people pray to, came from similar circumstances. They weren't, they weren't born of royalty immediately. Not all of them.
No, and for sure in history are there similarities and things. Absolutely. But there's not a conjunctive, there's not this is Horus, this is most of Horus, and again, I don't have all the things in front of me, but most of the Horus thing has been incredibly debunked. They're saying, well, this actually doesn't line up, and this doesn't line up, that Horus really wasn't born to a virgin mother from the god Osiris, that isn't what's in the text, but we're trying to bridge that gap. And why? Well, because it's Jesus, and it's controversial. Because if he is this, and if this is the truth, well, that's messed up. That means he was the God-man, and that changes the universe, or he's not, and we just go about our lives. And again, like you said, Ken, ultimately, I think It's offensive to our system and hard to swallow. We are born into sin. Like that, I don't like that word. Who likes the word sin? I mean, we're going at the rate where it's being called hate speech. There's Canadian pastors who are in jail right now. Australian pastors in jail for saying something was sin. That's kind of frightening for me. I don't like jail. I don't want to go to jail. And that he had to take this on for mankind. And if that is true, like I said, it's a game changer.
I don't believe that we were born into sin, but that's another topic.
I want to try to mainline this specifically on the issue. It's a twofold question. One, did Jesus exist? Was there a human being who walked the earth at year zero and did all, and just did he exist, and was he around enough that it did in fact, did he have followers, and were the followers who went on to create the church, was that the same Jesus that they were following? I'm not getting into, did he rise from the dead? Did he make blind men see? Did, any of that stuff? Water into wine, fish and bread. I'm talking about just, was there a man, and did he exist, and did he do these things? The non-miraculous accounts for him is what I'm looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, I've heard that there is, like you mentioned, like there was like legal documentation. I heard, and I think I've read it once, but there was some sort of Roman.
Josephus.
Well, that was a different one, but I mean there was an actual on a Roman accounting of Caesar's workings, and
Josephus was a Jewish historian.
Yeah, Josephus wasn't the Roman. No, this
he
was
converted, but he was a Jewish historian who then switched sides and went over to Rome, and was actually given the name of the Roman Caesar's family. Which was Flavius, I believe.
Okay.
Flavius Josephus was not his original name.
The point I was going for was that there was an actual Roman accounting for this man named Jesus who was crucified for blasphemy.
But nothing contemporary. Nothing.
No, and that's fine. But I'm just saying.
But it's not, to me it's not fine because you've got this situation where, in Matthew 27:51 says, at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and rocks split. The tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection. They went into the holy city and appeared to many people. This would be absolutely monumental to these people at this time if this occurred. The curtain splitting in two, there are no contemporary accounts of this happening. I mean, it's one thing to say that this man existed and was.
What do you mean there's no contemporary?
There is nothing from that time period. The closest thing that we have from that actual time period is Josephus' account outside of the Bible. And even the Bible is not contemporary, as most would argue.
Okay. Well, what about the Essenes?
What do you mean?
So the Essenes, kind of a monastic community outside of the culture, break off from the Zadokite priests, like a monastic community they were dedicated to recording history and culture at the time, are part of basically the contributors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and where they came from were people who also recorded this kind of outside of the followership of Jesus, and discovered under those same things there, and even the Gospels are.
I believe that the Dead Sea Scrolls don't contain any anything from the New Testament.
So the Dead Sea Scrolls don't directly, but the Dead Sea Scrolls were one part of a much larger archaeological find. And they actually toured around the country. I got to go see it a few years ago in Milwaukee, and it was phenomenal. It's really cool. And they absolutely don't believe at all. They're even changing it from AD to BCE, which, it's so frustrating. But, anyway. Anywho.
I think we have bigger fish to fry than that. I mean,
Right. Exactly. Like, come on.
When you say AD, I understand what you're talking about.
Right, exactly. Like, let's not acknowledge that there's a New Testament. Time split, after that, whatever. Anyway, moving on. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are a part of a much larger find. That was one chunk of the find. But amidst that find was also sections of the Gospels, and other pieces of antiquity. So, which is basically in the 1940s, for those of the audience who have no clue what we're talking about, you should read more. But number two,
read a frickin' book.
With this, I find this more than ironic, but you might just find it coincidental. A shepherd boy is out in the fields and literally throws a rock. It hits something in a cave and it breaks. And that turns out to be these kept documents of Isaiah, the Dead Sea Scrolls, but then also within that are accounts of Matthew, sections of, I want to say, First Corinthians, Romans, and other books. So there's more to the Dead Sea Scrolls than just, even though it's the Dead Sea Scrolls, it was a much larger find than just those pieces of information, just the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls are kind of what pushed forward the idea that everything pre-Christ was valid. But the things of the Gospels and of the New Testament were also found in the same very large find.
No, I'm not very well versed on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I will admit up front, but I have heard it said that the supposed accounts of, as you said, like the Gospels and Acts and Romans, are very, very extremely fragmentary and sort of disputed amongst historians that is in fact what they are.
So yeah, I think there is a chunk of historian, there is this chunk of, and here's the reality. The reality is we, much like the email that frustrated you to no end from our dear friend Rob.
It frustrated me.
He's not my friend yet.
It frustrated me until I read the very end, because I said this to David earlier, that it's very hard to convey tone through spoken word, or not spoken word, but through text.
Very much.
And
so.
I
usually the only term that comes off is prick.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Sorry, I keep cutting you off here.
No, not at all. It's your show, not mine. Cut me off all you want. I don't even remember what I was going to say.
Well, so let me jump in here. And I will say this, that in this conversation I've decided I'm going to make another T-shirt that says, "I'm not an apologist, sorry." Just
that's not bad. That's good.
I like that, yeah. Because we've all were like, listen, I'm not an apologist. I'm like, sorry. Anyway, yeah, hey, one-liners are what you're going to get with me today. So I've heard the same theories about the Dead Sea Scrolls and how the scrolls themselves do not correlate with the New Testament. But I've also heard what you said, Brian, where basically it had kind of come that, like you said, everything pre-New Testament was considered accepted at that point.
Yeah, so what you need
I don't know how that can be, though. I mean, all that tells me, if I'm being honest, is that at that time, people believed that to be true.
Yeah. So what you need to understand is, and I didn't know this until I saw the exhibit with my own eyes, the Dead Sea Scrolls were one chunk of a much larger find, and part of that much larger find was Romans, and not necessarily Romans penned from the hand of Paul, but Romans on papyrus that was able to be dated back to that time period of around AD 70, 80 or so, and other books.
So it was copied.
Yeah, possibly. But again, the Dead Sea Scrolls isn't, hey, this is a very original book of Isaiah.
That's what I mean.
What it is it's date. Here's the deal. There is nothing in antiquity, as far as I know, nothing in antiquity, no form of paper can last 3,000 years. Not one. You have to preserve that information as best as possible by passing it down, or yes, copying it onto another sheet. But to be able to even date that information to somewhere near that time period adds incredible credibility to it. It doesn't take it away. You could say, well, that's not the original copy. Well, there's no original copies of anything then, except, are there carvings on a wall of stone somewhere? Yes. But again, even that is a translation of information. It's a writing down of what happened. It's not actually what happened in front of you. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I'm starting to lose my mind. So,
fair enough.
So back to Jesus.
So just keep doing
like George.
Stop trying to convert me, Dave.
Because you need this in your life. Okay, so
now let's go wrestle.
What I want to know is Dead Sea Scrolls. That's interesting, but that doesn't answer my initial question. Well, I guess it does if there were in that find that they had the Book of Romans or portions of Romans or whatever.
Right.
And I'd like to know why atheists or freethinkers who like to debate that, I don't know what you call that. I know what apologetics are, but why they don't talk about that.
Well, they do. I've heard several.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've only heard very little.
I've heard Matt Dillahunty talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've heard Steph Andrews talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
They talked it on the one that you just mentioned just a little bit ago. They brought it up.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to me. I remember, well, I'm not going to get into that yet because that's a whole different conversation. So,
okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I want to keep focusing on what evidence can we have that this guy existed. And I know that, yes, there was Josephus. There was also, in that podcast that you showed me, Ken, they basically mentioned a bunch of the ones that I knew, and the gentleman on the show was saying that those were debunked, but he didn't give evidence as to how they were debunked, and I don't know how.
No, you have to buy his book for that, Dave.
Okay, well.
Which brings up another point. David, you said something in an earlier podcast about how, these atheists, this is a source of income for them, which it obviously is to a degree. But
just like it is for Christians.
But there's no money in atheism, really. I mean, when you talk,
I don't know, Dawkins might disagree with you on that.
93% of, you look at the amount of, they're considered among the freethinker, atheist, secular humanist community, these four individuals, one of them is deceased, but four individuals who are called the four horsemen of new atheism. It's Christopher Hitchens, who's deceased, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and Richard Dawkins.
Right.
And when you look at the numbers on their book sales, they pale in comparison to Joel Osteen and
but
these other
nobody else has that hair.
And those teeth.
And those teeth, those beautiful teeth, those choppers. Look at those choppers. And the purpose-driven life and these kinds of things. See, the thing is that
Purpose-Driven Life is the best-selling book in history of all time outside of the Bible. In American history.
That is interesting to know.
Yeah.
And this is my point exactly, is that there is big money in Christianity. And I was reading Dr. Carrier's book, and he somewhat stated in there, and I'll paraphrase, he said, these people need for this stuff to be true. I don't need for Jesus to be a myth.
Then why
if the Jesus story isn't true, their whole worldview falls apart. Their business falls apart. I believe that if these people, Sam Harris, Dennett, Dawkins, Matt Dillahunty, if they were able to actually find physical proof, or, we don't require physical proof of everything, but if they were able to find proof enough to convince them, they would become the most outspoken Christians. They would convert. They would change their mind. They're open to the idea that they can change their minds.
In which case, if something miraculous were to happen and there was all of a sudden proof that was undeniable that came out, well then they would lose their financial backing of being an atheist because, like they said, that Christians need that to be true. They would need it not to be true in order to continue on the career path that they're on. I mean, isn't that true? I mean, if Jesus all of a sudden showed up miraculously today and it was on every camera on CNN and on Fox News and on MSNBC, and he comes out of the clouds or some ridiculous fantasy type thing, but it's undeniable. You know what I mean? Now, what do these guys say?
I believe that if that were the case, and, I don't necessarily know that any of those things that you said would convince me either. Because we have magicians and
sure.
David Copperfield made the Statue of Liberty disappear.
Right.
Where'd it go? That's my question. Where'd it go?
Went into his back pocket. You believe that?
But seriously, though, I mean, and that's good that you say that. I totally understand that.
But as Dawkins has said, God would know. If God exists, He would know what it would take to require, for me to believe.
Right.
So, yes, in those situations, those people I believe that they would immediately convert. They would not just maintain this. Oh, it's fun to be an atheist. It's fun to debate theologians. It's fun to
no, it's not
believe in this stuff. You know what I mean? That's not the case. I don't believe that's the case. They're arguing from a perspective that a majority of people believe in these things, and they believe that they believe in those things for bad reasons. They don't believe that they're stupid people. They just believe that they're misinformed or uninformed or, but I truly believe that they would not just maintain their position of atheism if they truly believed.
Sure. Okay.
To make money, because there's no money to be made in atheism.
Well, and it would probably break your heart if you found out that was the case, right?
If what was the case?
Well, these people that you hold in such high esteem.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Welcome to what it's like being a Christian. Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. It's one of those things where if I'm just saying, it's a nice position to be in when you don't have to fight for it. When you say, well, where's the proof? I don't have to worry about anything because there's no proof here.
You're saying that...
As an atheist who says, hey, I don't have to prove anything. It's your job to prove it. I don't think it exists, so it's ridiculous otherwise. So I don't need it to be proven not true. All that needs to happen is to be proven that it's true.
Well, the burden of proof does lie with the extraordinary claim. I mean,
sure.
If I told you Bigfoot exists, would you say, well, you can't prove that he doesn't exist?
Yes.
So therefore, I'm going to believe in this until proven otherwise. You wouldn't say that.
Well, here's where I'm at with the historicity of Jesus. I pulled it up. Historicity.
There you go.
Of Jesus. Shut up. I pulled it up. I pulled it up here on Wikipedia, which of course we have to, put that claim out that Wikipedia is Wikipedia. It says the historicity of Jesus concerns the analysis of historical evidence to determine whether Jesus of Nazareth existed as a historical figure, and whether any of the major milestones in his life, as portrayed in the Gospels, can be confirmed as historical events. Let's see here. It says, since the 18th century, a number of quests for the historical Jesus have taken place, and historical critical methods for studying the historicity, I hate that word. We're just going to say the history of Jesus have been developed. Unlike for some figures in ancient history, the available sources are all documentary, in conjunction with biblical sources such as the Pauline letters and the Synoptic Gospels. 3 passages in non-Christian works have been used to support the history of Jesus. These are 2 passages in the writings of the Jewish historian Josephus, who we mentioned, and one from the Roman historian Tacitus. Although the authenticity of all 3 passages have been disputed to varying degrees, most scholars believe that all 3 are at least partially authentic. The majority viewpoint among scholars is that Jesus did in fact exist, but scholars often differ about the beliefs and teachings of Jesus, as well as the accuracy of the parts of his life that have been recorded in the Gospels. Scholars who believe that Jesus existed differ on the history of specific episodes described in the biblical accounts, but most scholars agree that Jesus was a Galilean Jew who was born between 7 to 4 BC and died 30 to 36 AD. That Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, that he was crucified by the order of the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate, and that he lived in Galilee and Judea and did not preach or study anywhere. The theory that Jesus never existed at all has very little scholarly support. That is what it says amongst a bunch of other paragraphs.
Right.
And I
Now,
would say that, what?
Well, I was going to say now, whether or not that, is sufficient for me or for our listener or for either of you, I don't know. But it's interesting to know that, many scholars can come to some level of agreement that maybe there was a guy.
Yep.
Yeah. Well,
And that's where I like that, because at least that means that this guy existed, or we choose to believe that he existed. Whether or not you choose to believe all the divinity and the miraculous stuff, that comes a question of, I mean, I know you hate it, Ken, but that's faith.
Well, no, not entirely. I think that's to me, that's a poor representation. Faith is not without reason. That is not what faith is.
Please help me discuss this, because Ken has been beating me up for weeks on the word faith, and I suck. I have no idea why we use that word.
Faith is belief, somewhat based on what you see, and the ability to follow. Let me put it in context. I'm sitting in a chair right now, but I can say, "Oh, that chair, I believe in that chair because it's right there. I believe in it." And everybody can be like, "I believe in the chair too. The chair is great. Let's follow the chair." Sit down. That's faith. Do you see what I'm saying? That's faith. It's belief lived out.
I disagree. That is not faith. That you are exercising hope that chair will hold you based on other people's experiences with chairs. The fact that you have seen chairs your whole life, you've come into contact with chairs that you generally sit in don't break.
How do you?
Say, wait a minute now. Hold on.
It's not the same thing.
Well, you're arguing that I'm reasoning the chair, and I'm arguing that faith is, but your take on faith is that it is blind, and it's just hoping that this thing is real. And I would say that to me is a lot more wishing and luck than it is faith. Faith has reason, and yes, does it have a level of, I'm going to follow you, not fully knowing where it's going to take me, but knowing that I can put my confidence in it.
Okay. Do we have any accounts reliable accounts outside of the Bible, and I'm going to say in this instance, I'm going to give you that the Bible is accurate and reliable, okay? So I'm just for argument's sake.
Sure.
Do we have any accounts of a man being born of a virgin during that time period or without the use of modern technology? Do we have any accounts of that happening?
No.
Okay. Do we have any accounts of people being able to magically turn water into wine, and water into alcohol?
No, that would be a very profitable venture.
Do we have any accounts of a human being ceasing to live, having his heart cease to beat for 3 full days, and then somehow starting again on its own without the use of modern medical technology?
No, but I got your point.
Okay, yeah, I could go on and on and on, right?
Right.
So you say, we observe things. Our faith is based on our observations. So where does your faith that those things happen to that man, based on your observations of the world around you, where do those square up?
Okay. And a couple of things. I would say that if we're saying the Bible's valid for a little bit, Romans 1 and 2 specifically talks about, here's the reality is it's been made plain to us, and then it comes back to this point. And I think this is why there are those who are arguing adamantly against it, even though history seems, and most of academia seems to be on the side of it. It comes down to how I want to view, what lens am I going to view the information through. That's the email that was sent to you on. Basically, there's a difference between information and then the interpretation of that information. So ultimately, we have over 500 witnesses to the resurrection of Christ, 500 documented witnesses in antiquity to the resurrected Jesus after they watched him die.
Where are these documents? You're talking in the Bible.
Well, no, yeah. I mean, if we're gonna stick with Bible, but if we're saying the Bible's accurate, which I know everybody's saying, I don't believe it. But let's say we do, and you over 5. If anybody was in court today and 500 people were like, that guy shot that guy, you're going to jail. I mean, that's just it. 500 witnesses, you're done.
It's funny you mentioned that because on one of our previous episodes, I played an audio clip from Penn Jillette, who is a staunch atheist, very funny comedian, very great magician. Yeah, very much so. And he pointed out a very similar analogy where if you were in a courtroom and said that, the talking snake told Eve to eat the apple, we would say that she's lying. That's ridiculous. But when somebody says, I killed my children because God told me to do it, where's the line? Do you know what I mean? I think I reversed. I think you said, if you accept that the talking snake, well, it's a talking snake. If she said it, God said it, then there it is. But today we look at that and we go, no, we don't do that.
There's no jury in this country that would acquit that woman. If she said, God told me to kill my kids, why are those Bible-believing Christians in that jury box?
That's what it was.
Who claim that they're Bible-believing Christians. How do they not say, you know what? Maybe God told her to frickin' kill her kids.
The talking snake is okay.
It's quite possible.
But, I would argue, first of all, that doesn't align with the character of God whatsoever, or the voice,
Have you read the
voice
Old
of who he is. I have multiple times and still do. And I would argue absolutely that is not the character of the God of the Old Testament.
So when the Jews complained that they didn't have enough meat to eat, after they were walking through the desert for 40 years, they complained once that they didn't have enough meat to eat.
They didn't complain once, Ken. That's out of context. That's just not true.
Let's say they complained every day. If you're walking through the desert, you just put this into your...
When they said they didn't have enough meat to eat, meat came from the sky. Is that what you're referring to?
What was wrong with that meat? What was the situation with that meat?
Remind me, Ken. Go ahead.
So God had God tricked him into eating. He said, "You want meat? I'll give you meat up to your nostrils, or it'll be coming out of your nostrils." Mm-hmm. And he caused these seagulls or pigeons, some sort of bird, to fall out of the sky, waist deep or shoulder deep or whatever. And so when these people ate these pigeons, or whatever they were, these avian varieties, they were infected with plague, and so they died.
Sure. Well,
so is that
ultimately we open up a bigger category here.
Is that an act of love?
I would ultimately say, yeah, it is, but I would have to be able to give time and context to that. You can't bring out one portion of Scripture and say, that's messed up. First of all, I would say your worldview doesn't really give you reason for saying what's messed up, because there is no governor. There's no governor outside of, a moral compass to say this is what's good and this is what's bad. Not only that, it's a very American mentality to say, I don't understand how God could, and fill in the blank, so thereby it must not be true. That's an American ideal. If we don't like it and we don't get on board with it, it just can't be so.
So you're saying that I can't use my human intuition to understand what God meant at that time?
No, I didn't say that. What I said was, based on, if you remove all sorts of a governor, then what's your governing saying for saying what God did there was right or wrong? Based on what?
Based on my experience as a human being. And
but what if your experience is subjective, Ken?
Well, right, which is why there aren't really too many moral absolutes.
That's a scary proposition to me.
Well,
that there are no moral absolutes.
Is
or few.
Killing someone always wrong?
That's a big question. And I can explain the Exodus thing. I can answer that question. Where do you want me to jump in?
No, I'm just saying. I know we're jumping around here a lot, but
right.
Is it always wrong to kill somebody? And if it is always wrong to kill somebody, then why did God tell the Jews to go out and slaughter everybody? To take all the women the women who haven't known a man by laying with him, take them, keep them for yourselves.
Yeah. So
kill all the children. Moses got pissed because his people went into a town that God told him to. God spoke to Moses, said, "Tell your people to go into this town and kill everybody." And they came back. They only killed the men.
You could keep going.
Right.
But because the Old Testament has a lot of it's rough, it's brutal, and there's a reason why it's called the Old Testament, or the better translation is the Old Covenant.
It's all commanded by God.
Hold on. So the Bible is one story, and at the end of the day, it's centered around one man, and that's Jesus. And outside of Jesus, to me, the Bible is a lot more rough. But if Jesus is true, it brings a lot more into perspective. None of us right now would say Navy SEAL finding the guy from ISIS who chopped off that guy's head and taking him out would be evil or wrong. But yet what you're bringing up about the God of the Old Testament, what you're leaving out, Ken, is centuries upon centuries of cultures of people who are committing genocide, and these are the people the Israelites are taking out. People committing genocide, people committing pedophilia, people killing their firstborns to sacrifice to their gods. People who've been warned for hundreds or thousands of years, turn away from this. Don't go this direction. You're talking about a God who's cruel, and yet you're leaving out part of the context of a God who's long-suffering, who hung in there for years upon years, who stood with these Israelites, who said, we've seen you do amazing things, and I still reject you. And the thing is, and we're still having the same conversation here, and that is, how am I going to look at what's in front of me? What's in front of me is life is hard. Here's the deal, and I'm not saying this. I lost a son, and I don't bring this up to pull heartstrings for the sake of an objective argument, because to me that's despicable. I'm bringing it up to say I have had ministry has at times not been good to me. We'll just leave it at that. The people of God, I will affirm, can suck. And I'm one of them. And sometimes I really suck. I can just be like, man, I was just a tool there. What was the matter with me? And I probably have been at some point in this conversation. So I have, between that and suffering, and I look at it and be like, this world is broken. And then I can point my finger and say, either you're not real, or you're not good, or both. Or there is another way to look at the information. There is another way to say, maybe there's something higher that's above what I can see. And yet, what I see gives me glimpses to the evidence of what's there. Gives me, I bet you travel a lot, right, Ken?
Yeah, lots.
Yeah. I've been to Colorado multiple times. I'm sure you have too. And to me, it's one of the most breathtaking places in the United States. You know, it's just amazing. Driving through Garden of the Gods, just freaking unbelievable. It's like, holy crap. The place is amazing. Now, what's interesting there is Denver is a largely liberal humanist culture, especially in academia, in that realm of the country. And I look at it as somebody who doesn't live there, who lives in the flatlands of Illinois. You know, we drive 12 hours to see nothing, and but you go there and you're like, hey, it's amazing. Now there's a way to view that. There's a lens to say, no, it's, you know, science explains where this all came from, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not arguing that science doesn't explain it. What I'm saying is, but then what's the point of origin? What's the point of information? What's the point of intelligence? What's the governor for this information? Where is the point? Why would a bunch of guys come together and argue the life of this man, the death and the resurrection, and then all die alone, separately from each other, under severe persecution, and die badly for it? Why? Something doesn't add up.
Well, there are people throughout history that have died for various beliefs, though. And
absolutely.
You had 19 people fly planes into buildings because they believed in their God.
Yeah, but that's martyrdom. Martyrdom is different than murder. That is not martyrdom.
They believed it just as much as you guys believe in your. They had the same. Now, ultimately, their faith caused them to do something that we view as a horrible act. I agree that it's a horrible act. But to them, they weren't doing something wrong. They were doing something very, very right.
Well, I would agree. You can sincerely believe and be sincerely wrong. I'll affirm that all day long.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
But there's a drastic difference between the fathers of the church who were martyred versus guys who took the lives of others. Those are not the same camp. You can say they may call themselves martyrs, but they took a whole lot of people with them. The first church fathers didn't do that. If anything, they fought against it. And Jesus is the first person in any antiquity to affirm women and to say these aren't property. These are human beings, and do the same thing with children. The church as a whole is the first group ever in any nation of the world to begin hospitals. The first hospital in any nation of just about any given nation was begun by Christians, by believers, the church. Why? Because the driving force of that, are there idiots in the church? You bet, and I'm probably one of them. But that being said, as a whole, it's a force for good that has changed the face of the earth in largeness for the good. But then what you get, the discrepancy is, how do you define what's good? Well, morally, we would probably all come together on the same page and say, you know, the defense of the innocent, you know, murder is bad of the innocent, and down the line. But then how do you define that? Why is that good? If it's just an entirely secular humanist worldview, then the weak should die. All right, I'm done.
No, but I say that
our morality is based on survival. It's based on the flourishing of human beings. I don't like it when people steal from me. I know what it feels like to have something stolen from me that I worked really hard to obtain, or
they might
somebody
like it.
punches
So how do you?
me. And so and the thing is like people say this all the time. I hear Christians say, "Well, where do you get your morality from? Where do you get it from in the Bible? How do you decipher it? Why do we have 38? Take 50 Christians, line them up, and I want to go down the line and I want to ask each one, what are your morals? What are your values?
Sure.
How is it that I'm going to get such a vast array of different answers, different responses?
Well, I would argue that the smart ones.
If this God wanted, he loves us, he needs us to know that he's there, he wants us to know that he's there, and he wants us to worship him, why is it that we have 38,000 sects of Christianity in this country alone?
I would agree with that.
How is it that we don't even understand the original text? We don't have the original text of the Bible, and nor, if we did, we wouldn't understand them because they're written in dead languages. Why is it that this God didn't say, like, here's how to maintain these documents?
Well, and Ken, let me just jump in here. And the way I feel about it is, even American history, we screw up. So I am definitely able to accept the possibility and the probability that the original text is quite possibly very different than the way we've interpreted it over the hundreds of years, thousands of years. But it doesn't negate the possibility that some of the information seeped through. It doesn't negate the thought that Paul Revere did ride, just maybe not as far as we said he did.
But I'm not saying that it negates the possibility. I'm saying, like, how do you determine, what is the criterion that you use to determine which stuff is accurate and which stuff we should discount?
Well, I'm with you on that one, Ken. I would probably detract from that argument, Dave. Like, well, part of it. So, again,
is that your Christian way of telling me to shut up?
No, not shut up. I'm saying I disagree. That's my Christian way of saying
it's all good, man. This is his way
disagree.
of saying. What was your buddy's name there that sent the email?
Rob.
It's all good.
Because I don't think the information's wrong. I think a lot of people spent many years, many died, bled and died over what is now considered canon in Scripture. There's a reason. Well, there's a reason, like you said. I am on the not the Catholic side, but the Protestant side. Because I don't believe the Apocrypha holds to a solid version of canon. But why do we hold up? So I would say these are all honest arguments and questions. But again, what I think you have here is an evidence that if you went piece by piece, which we've done just a little bit of, we've only scratched the surface, that there are valid answers for each one of them. But ultimately, I would say part of it is then. But if you're saying, but I don't like this, but I don't like that, but I don't like, then at that point I would say a little bit your prejudice is on your sleeve. Because at this point you're saying, but even if I check this box and check this box and check this box, you're still saying, I still want 20 more boxes checked. And then I would say,
what boxes are checked though? I don't know what.
Well, I think, again, I'm not saying you believe what I'm responding to, but what I am saying is I'm saying what you're saying about the God of the Old Testament, I'm saying you're leaving a whole lot of information out when you bring those things up. Do you believe that it's right for us to, you say, I don't like it if somebody steals from me. If they steal from me, do you believe it's right for them to be, caught, prosecuted, and sent to jail? I think
it would depend on the offense. And
Okay, guy steals 100 grand from you and he sets your house on fire. Let's not have him in the street.
Right, yes, exactly. Right? I totally agree with that.
Right. But I don't want the government or the law being the governor of that, because being the ones who say, this is what defined the morality. So that God of the Old Testament, you're saying he said to them, do this, and he said, do that. Well, there's a grander picture. If you're seeing, look, I have 4 kids. You have a child. Someday your child's going to ride a bike. You can't stop that child from falling. And if you do, that child will never ride a bike. You can't stop that child from making bad decisions. But what you can do is be there when they make that bad decision and say, I still want to be your dad.
Right,
and
but
that's the God of the Old Testament.
But I can't tell that child that it's not okay. I can tell both my kids.
Which God did again and again and again. God does
Did he
in the
ever
Old
say
Testament.
that it was not okay to own another human being as a piece of property and treat them as farm equipment?
That's not what I see. Again,
you could beat them whenever you wanted to, and that as
that's
long
not
as they
there.
got up after 2 days, as long
But
as they
that
got
isn't
up
there.
after 2 days.
You're going to have to show me that section of Scripture. But that God of encouraging slavery, I see just the opposite. The whole book of Exodus is God saying, I am not down with slavery. I want you free. But that being said, there is evil and fallenness in this world, and it's going to have to be addressed. And until I can finally pay the price for it, there's going to be a stay of execution just trying to preserve it till we can redeem it. Now, ultimately, that does saying, if you're like, well, I can't get on board with that. Okay, fair enough. All right, because it's not my job to argue. Nobody's argued into belief. That doesn't happen.
Well, no,
or disbelief. But I do think education is massively influential. Young people who go to college who have no clue how to respond to their professor who's strongly atheistic. You know what? A lot of times they're like, well, I guess it's just not true. And that's unfortunate because a lot of times it's the same on both sides. You're frustrated at a good chunk of Christendom because they're uneducated. And that's fair. A good chunk of them are. And I would say I would feel actually the same way. A lot of them give up on belief based on checking out all the information.
Well, and ultimately for me, and I've run into this in my own life, is just, we all believe different things, right? I try to believe in as many things that are true and as few false things as possible. I could be wrong about everything that I know. There's a possibility that I'm wrong about everything. But when my problem comes with Christians that have never done an ounce of research, have never actually listened to anything that doesn't offer an apologistic viewpoint of what they already believe, doesn't already confirm what they believe. Republicans only watch Fox News. Democrats only watch MSNBC. Is that a reliable epistemology? Is that a good way to come to knowledge? And my problem lies in the fact that those people, okay, you can believe whatever you want, but don't tell me that I'm wrong. You know what I'm saying?
See, and what I hear there, Ken, is not so much that your problem isn't so much with Jesus as it is with people. Does that make sense? Or maybe not Jesus, but your problem isn't per se with Christianity per se, as much as the offense comes from people, the way they behave.
Yes.
When they say, well, you're wrong.
Well, yeah. I don't care what you believe in. If you believe in certain things and you keep it to yourself, or, obviously, you happen to be a pastor, so that's your job is to
not keep it to myself.
Not keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
But
I mean, and I want to.
You're denying a certain 3% of our population, 3 to 10% of our population. You're denying them civil rights based on your document that you hold so dearly.
Yeah, I don't know where that comes in, a denial of civil rights.
That comes into more of a
stand by that at all.
Yeah, that's a political aspect.
And that's a big problem here in America. To quote N.T. Wright, probably the world's most renowned New Testament theologian of our day. I think he's at Oxford or Cambridge, but I remember him saying, and there's a YouTube video of him saying this, I think somebody was asking the question about homosexuality, but he just addressed this. He said the problem with the American church versus the rest of the world is everything you do and discuss is tied back into politics.
Yeah.
And it's not that way in the rest of the world. Well, and that is a big problem for us. I don't think the government should be in the business of morality or marriage or anything else. Like, ultimately, I don't know what happened when we were like, hey,
our entire Catholic audience just exploded.
Let's give you power.
Our entire Catholic audience just exploded when you, a pastor, just said that.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's funny that you mentioned. I know. So I want to mention something here, and it's interesting that you brought up homosexuality. And Ken, take this the total right way, man. Your comment that you just made about if you believe something, keep it to yourself. I got to be honest and say that sounds a lot like, hey, if you want to be gay, be gay. Just don't do it by me.
No.
And if I'm wrong, fine. That's the way it comes off.
No. I'm saying my problem, like I said, the frustration stemmed from not only those people saying, oh, it's fine. People around me say, hey, you need this in your life. This is important to me. I find it extraordinarily helpful. I wish you could experience this too. That's fine with me. But it's where those people who have never actually read the Bible, who have only attended church once in a while on Sundays, who can't sit and have the kind of conversation that we're having right now, who sit and tell me you're wrong and look down upon me because I don't believe what they believe. You know what I'm saying? That's
absolutely wrong. Matter of fact, it goes against what they believe, if that's their stand.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
It thoroughly does. Matter of fact, if anything, somebody asked me on the issue specifically of gay marriage, and at the end of the day, it's like, I'm not in the business of trying to keep somebody from something. Would I do it? No, I wouldn't perform that ceremony because of what I believe the Word of God says. But do I need you to not be gay or be gaily married? I don't need you to do anything for me. I don't need you, that's messed up if someone's like, I need you to believe this. No, you don't. God doesn't need my defense. If he's God, I'm pretty sure he's going to be okay.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
He doesn't, I don't need somebody to believe. Now, what I do need to do is say, hey, this is awesome. I'd love to share it with you if you ever want it. But if you don't, hey, man, that's cool.
And I'm totally on board with that. I'm fine with that. That's great. That's the way we share knowledge with each other, That's just life.
I would argue that's what our forefathers used to do.
So many situations where you can just visibly see. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I was at work, and one of my coworkers found out that I was a non-believer. And we were doing our tapings in New York City at the Manhattan Center, and for the 3 days that we were there, almost every time, I would walk into the arena during the day, and he would be in the ring working with somebody or off to the side, whatever, and he would see me from across the room, and he would say, "Atheist! There's an atheist in the room," and he was half joking, but then he would call me over and say, "Come here for a second, come here," and then he would call another person up, and he would say, "Do you believe in God?" to that other person, and that person would say yes. Ken here doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe in God.
Well, that just sounds like a prick.
Yeah, I believe that's called shit starter, is what that is.
Right, and he's half joking.
Sure.
But atheism is a dirty word in this country. If you do not believe, you are... they did a poll pretty recently where atheism came up lower than, they asked these people, who would you trust with your children? And atheists came up.
That doesn't seem like a very biased question, does it?
Right. No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. But child rapists and convicted felons were given. People basically said, I would let a convicted felon watch my kid before I would let an atheist watch my kid.
That's ridiculous.
Well, that's crazy.
So that's what I'm talking about. That's where my problem exists. That's
You got to stop meeting people. That's all there is to it.
I hate people suck.
Well,
that's I think what we've come to the conclusion. People suck. It's been a good episode, everybody.
I was going to say, what really sucks is that we have come to the end of our time, so we're unfortunately going to have to put a pin in it. But I must say, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
I did too, and I hope we have it again.
Thanks
I'm
for
sure
having me on, guys. Thanks for letting me blabber. Appreciate it.
No, it was nice. It's nice to have somebody on who just kind of gets it, can talk with us and understand.
Or completely doesn't get it. One of those two.
Yeah. Either or.
David, I'm getting sick and tired of you stacking the deck against me here.
Anytime you want to bring someone on, bro.
That's my problem. I don't know anybody, and none of my circle of friends, are in the same boat as I am.
I will.
That is a problem, Ken. Like I'm this atheist, and every one of my friends. I can understand why you'd be pissed.
Hey, my wife runs a Christian business. She runs a Christian website.
So you're getting hit with it on all angles, man.
Yeah.
Wow. Man, from wake up to wake. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing, but
no,
it's ironic. It's ironic.
It's funny.
I appreciate you guys talking with me. Thanks so much.
Hey, man, we appreciate you coming on the show, Brian, and we'll definitely have you back in the future. We'll have to get some fellow atheists on the show to help make Ken feel a little better. For the record, I brought some believers on, and I felt like I'm an idiot, so it's fair.
Well, I always feel like I'm an idiot, so.
Not at all.
I think at the end of the day, Ken, you're just more red than probably most anybody else they could bring on, unless they're in academia or something.
Good stuff. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. This was a great episode. Did Jesus exist? I'm going with yes. I'm going with there was a guy. There was a guy named Jesus, and he did some stuff, and he said some things, and some people told some other people about it, and where you go from there is on you. But listen, thanks everybody for tuning in. Give us a 5-star review on iTunes. If you think this is great, let us know. If you think it sucks, send us an email. pushthebuttonpodcast@gmail.com. We want to hear everything, good, bad, indifferent. And, T-shirts.
Movie Mojo Monthly. Excuse me.
Oh, that's right. Brian can be heard on Movie Mojo Monthly.
What?
It's a monthly
forgot about that.
film reviewing podcast. I'm sorry. You can check it out on DVMPE.com, just like the Push the Button podcast. And, I got to give a shout out. Ken had a great interview with the great wrestling legend, icon, Mr. Rowdy Piper. Rowdy Piper.
Wow.
And it was a phenomenal interview that you guys had. And it was an amazing moment. You can download it at Piper's Pit, Rowdy Piper's podcast.
Very
podcast
cool.
1. It was Ken. It was a surreal experience hearing the great Rowdy Piper mention our podcast. So
yeah,
very cool. Very cool.
He's such an amazing human being. He just really is. It's just a sweetheart of a man.
Well, I never chew bubblegum without thinking about getting all out of bubblegum.
Best line from a movie ever.
And he came up with that all by himself. That's all him.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I heard an interview with him, and he said he had a notebook that he filled up with a bunch of different just badass sayings, and he finally went to John Carpenter and said, "This is the one I'm going with." And he was like, "Do it." And it became an iconic line.
That's great.
But
podcast as we speak.
Yeah, so there you go. Ken, congrats on your interview with the Rod Man. He was awesome. And you can I sound like I'm doing an interview with you now. You can watch Impact Wrestling on Wednesday nights on Spike TV.
Yes, you can.
And and you can catch Brian on Movie Mojo Monthly once a month on the DVM Podcast Empire, and I'll be tooling around somewhere. So thanks again for listening for the third time. Take care. We'll catch you next time. And Ken.
Guys from balmy Minnesota. This is Mr. Anderson telling you folks, just talk it out. Don't get hot.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Mr. Anderson.
Don't push it.